It's Pirate King, and I'm really excited about today's interview. With me, we have the cartographer, artist, battle map maker, DM Andy. Thank you so much for being here. We got a bunch of questions to get into. I want to talk about map making, but before we do, can you give us a little bit of background about yourself, how you got involved in role playing games, and what inspired you to start making these gorgeous battle maps?
Yeah, awesome. Well, first off, thanks, Pyram, for inviting me. It's we have a lot of dialogue on Discord, you and I, but
Yeah.
it's always great to have a face-to-face conversation.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to invite me to your YouTube channel. Thank you.
Of course.
So yeah, my name's Andy, DM Andy, very clever there on that one. I've been into role-playing games, well, D&D proper, not long. In fact, I'm a fifth edition guy, so I joined going on, I want to say it's almost 4 years now at this point, but I have not played any previous editions of D&D. So there's this whole other world of former editions that I still have yet to explore, that are chock full of lore that I'm really excited to kind of dive into.
I think people are going to be really
Um,
surprised to hear that because I mean you're such an iconic map maker, and to say that you've only been involved in D
yeah.
and D for 4 years, that's kind of that's super impressive.
Well, the thing of it is I've been into fantasy my whole life. I mean, ever since I can remember, as a child, my dad was really big into um fantasy art, back in the day, especially in the 80s and early 90s. So we have just tomes of books. One of his favorite illustrators was Boris Vallejo.
Right?
And I remember him and I used to sit at the dining room table and I'd sketch Boris's art. My dad would teach me how to do like watercolor paintings, and he'd have these just beautiful illustrations, recreations of some of Boris's art.
So
So I was always kind of into like the Hero Quest board games and
right.
tons of fantasy origin, just not D&D proper.
What inspired you to go from just role playing game? You were in it obviously for a couple of years to get you to start building these gorgeous battle maps. I mean, your art. You obviously have some artist background, but what was that leap?
Yeah, so with D&D, it was funny because I've always wanted to play D&D, and I grew up in the whole satanic panic of the 80s, despite my dad being a great illustrator and artist and loving fantasy art. My mom, on the other hand, was, I was forbade from playing the game of Satan at home, and it was kind of part of that, right? So D&D was always kind of a banned product name in my household when I was growing up. I'm 40 now, so I was born in 82. And so I've always wanted to play D&D. Got into it finally, like I said, 4 years ago. I have a wonderful group of just close friends, and we all play. And originally, when we first started, I was doing the pen and paper, the dry erase marker on just a laminate grid, just kind of roughly sketching out maps. But I love maps. I've always loved maps, whether they be, real world maps, or fantasy maps, parchment maps. Anytime I bought a video game or a book that came with a map handout, I would excitedly tear it open and hang it up on my wall. Like, I just love maps.
Oh, I do too.
So yeah, there's a sense of wonder in looking at a map, and my favorite parts of a map are the blank spaces, right? Because it gets me thinking, well, what is there?
Yeah, what is
What's in
there?
that spot?
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a mountain range, and it's got a name of the mountain range, but
yeah.
what monsters lurk
What
there? What
what
secrets
could be
lie
there? Yeah,
underneath?
yeah.
Yeah. Um, so those types of things always really excited me. I would say for D&D, the two biggest draws for me are maps, obviously, and world building. Those are
Right.
the two big, huge things that I love about the game. So, it wasn't long after I got my feet wet with learning the rules, and I started as a DM. I didn't even start as a player. I just was
Really?
like, I'm gonna run this. Yeah,
Wow.
no
So
experience at all. I'm gonna dive right in as a dungeon
wow,
master.
that's ballsy.
Yeah. It was terrifying. It still is. DMing for 4 years now, and every single session is terrifying, in a good way. Because
Right.
because I
Right.
care and I want a good session and I want to make sure I'm prepared, right? So, but it wasn't long after that I discovered Incarnate. In fact, it was probably just a few months after buying the Lost Mines of Phandelver starter set, and I started just playing with my wife. I DM'd for a
Right.
solo game. It was just me and my wife. I created a couple NPCs to help her out along her quest. I made a super generic, you're escorting a cargo wagon down a road and you get attacked by goblins sort of thing. Um, which is also the intro to Lost Mines, and in that. I discovered Incarnate, and I didn't realize that there was map making software at the time,
Right.
outside of hand drawn. And I mean, immediately fell in love with that platform. I got lost in Incarnate. I
Well,
built
why
maps and
don't
I printed them.
for those of us that are ignorant to what Encarta is, why don't you explain a little bit what that software does and how it works?
Yeah, yeah. So Incarnate is much like other popular map making softwares that are out there. Dungeon Draft being another one. I believe there's Wonder Draft as well. I haven't used that one. Dungeon Alchemist. We'll talk more about the others as well. But Incarnate is a map making software that allows people like me and DMs to easily piece together a map. It comes stock with assets in their library, different styles of battle maps from world maps to parchment maps to even top down perspective battle maps as well. You can use it to create scenes for theater of the mind. You can use it to create world maps for your whole campaign world, or even single top down battle maps, which is what my focus is. For things like inns and
Right.
forest encounters and all sorts of fun stuff. So it gives you the tools where it doesn't necessarily need to be hand drawn, but I like to use it as more of a supplemental tool in addition to, adding things like custom art that I've hired artists to help me with because I'm not a hand artist, even though I have a little bit of experience. That's not my forte. Um,
So, quick
but
question: what you mentioned the map? What was the first map on Encarta that you did?
oh boy, I wish I saved it, and I don't have it any longer. I might be able to pull it up in a Google Doc, and if I do, I'll share it with you, and you can share it with your peeps. But the first map I did was a horrible looking goblin forest. It was just a standard green background with a couple trees kind of plucked onto the map, and that was about it. It was I think everybody's first map is usually something like that.
I've done only
Here's a
one.
grassy,
I did one.
yeah.
I gave up.
Here's a grassy background, and I've plopped a couple trees on the map, and we're like, okay, ship it. That's a forest map. We're good to go.
Well,
But that was my first one.
in a in full disclosure, uh, we pretty much started on Patreon together. We met online. I was putting the first guide to the expanded Curse of Strahd together, Legends of Barovia. I think we started our Patreon in the same month.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
we reached out to each other. We met on Reddit, and I said, "I
yeah,
love your battle maps. How can we work together?" And it's been almost 2 years now since we've been
yeah.
yeah,
It
been
was battle maps. Your first message was battle maps and whiskey. I
That's
remember that
right.
because you're
Battle
like,
maps and
yeah,
whiskey. I love whiskey.
yeah.
You love whiskey, so we were talking
You could
about
you could
whiskey.
see my whiskey bar right here. I got an actual
I,
Jack Daniel's
I
whiskey
don't
barrel
have a
carved
whiskey bar,
out.
but I have an empty bottle back here. So
Yeah, yeah. So it was our love of whiskey and battle maps that brought us together, as these things happen in the community.
that yeah, it's really amazing, and we're both on almost the opposite sides of the world. You're in California. I'm in Portugal.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, but that was really amazing. So I think it was in what, maybe May of 2021 when we said, "Hey, let's really try to make a go of this."
Hmm.
You're on Patreon. We started on Patreon together to do all this, and I just want to say that I have noticed an exponential curve in the level of quality and details in your map. It's getting to a level where I just spend hours staring into the map, and I see all these little things like a bird, and I can see some stuff over in the corner, and then there's some engravings in the stonework, and what I find very helpful when I look into it and the level of details that you put in there is there's two things. It's not just details, but the details that you put in there are actually telling a story. Like there was somebody
Mhm.
living here and they left a note on the table and there's some scrolling on the floor or there's a broken window. And from that, I'm able to pull little bits and pieces and start
Mhm.
formulating the scene from that. What is your thought process when you're putting these details into the map? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I love that question, and it's funny because it can go either way. I think that there's a camp of DMs who really like the standard, almost very basic graph paper like maps where you just draw a circle and say, here's a room. You see that in a lot of Wizards, official Wizards publications as well. In
Right.
fact, I feel like they're actually leaning more toward the old school graph paper maps and some of their more recent work. Um, and I respect that. I love the fact that there's a camp of DMs who just give me a blank room and I'll tell the players what they're seeing because that gives them full creative license. And while I that there's nothing wrong with that camp of thought, I go hard in the other direction. And while I realize that sometimes it could be a little limiting, but on the flip side of that, to a creative, I think it's a blessing and a curse to have a blank square because that puts the onus of creativity on that DM. You have to think about what's in that room.
Right.
And you have to make it different every time. And you can't just be like, oh, there's a couple chairs and a barrel. You know, at some point in time, DMs have so much to do
Right.
that when I started out on my map making process, my goal was to really try to make maps as ready for the DM as possible. And so with that, to your question, I love to go hard the other direction and add details. I like to tell little stories. I like to think about the logistics behind a map. In fact, I'm working on an inn right now for an adventure coming up with Lunch Break Heroes, and I think I always like to think, okay, if the inn serves food, well, it needs a kitchen, right? How do the chimneys going to work? How is that chimney going to connect to the chimney above it on the second floor? Where do the serving staff go? How do they get around the inn? Is there a storage closet? Where do adventurers put their horses? There's got to be a little stables. I added a couple outhouses because the joke with D&D maps is that there's never any bathrooms, right? So,
Yeah. There's no
um,
bath. Where do they go to
I,
the bathroom?
yeah, yeah. In fact, to as a nod to that, because a lot of my maps I don't actually add bathrooms. Sometimes I do, and it's not exactly like in the medieval realms there was a lot of robust plumbing
Right.
solutions outside of a ditch dug outside. So every now and again I'll add some restrooms, but more often than not, I'll just simply throw a bucket under a bed, and that's just
Right.
kind of my nod to say,
The
well, here you
the
go. I gave
the
you a
piss
bucket.
pot.
But so I like to think, for example, the in map that I'm working on. It's got a couple barrels of ale behind the bar. Well,
Right.
where do they store their empty barrels? Where do they store their full barrels? How do they roll them? Barrels full of alcohol are very heavy,
Right.
and it takes rolling. And so I added some metal skids in the storeroom where it's like a ramp where they can kind of roll the barrels up and lock them in place. I have barrel lines on the floor representing all the times that they roll barrels back and forth as it creates
Right.
divots.
It tells a
It's
story. It's
little,
telling a story.
yeah. It tells the story of life. It
Right.
tells the story that people live here and they work here, and sometimes battles have happened. Sometimes bar brawls have broken out. So maybe a table is splintered because two
Right.
barbarians got into a duel one day and
Bash.
they had to be thrown out.
I I I
Um,
I I write. I like that not only for my own creativity, which helps me weave the stories that I put together for the different guides that I'm writing. But
yeah.
there's something else that I think is important, and it's kind of a tip that I give to fellow dungeon masters, is when you're dungeon master, being a dungeon master, I like to focus my narrative on the tone and the atmosphere of maybe what
Mhm.
they're smelling, what they're hearing, or the mood that they're feeling,
Mhm.
and let the map be the eyes. So I don't
Yeah.
say you see a table, you see a fireplace. the map speaks for itself. And I
Yeah.
can I fill in the smell. I fill in the other senses, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that allows me to think about, when they walk in there, they can probably smell that venison stew wafting through the air and some stale
Hmm.
ale, and they can hear some noise in the background, and there's a flicker in the shadows over in the corner. But I don't have to describe the room because the battle map, especially your battle maps, just is flood with that visual details. So the people are looking at the battle map, and then they're hearing my description of the atmosphere and the tenor and the
Hmm.
tone of what's going on. So I love that combination as a dungeon master. I wanted to
Well,
jump. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, real quick. It's one thing I've noticed, and I agree. I'm very focused as well on all the senses when you set a scene, but primarily using VTT software, which my group uses now. Even though we're all local, it's just easy for a bunch of mid 30s to 40-year-old adults to just connect over Discord than it is to drive to each other's homes. But I found that in the VTT world, even if a battle isn't taking place, hence the name battle map, right? My
Right.
players still do appreciate a map where they can see their tokens, they can move their tokens around, they can see what NPCs
Right.
are in a room. It really helps them become more immersed in that scene, versus other methods that I've tried in the past. At least for my group, I realize every group is
I,
different. Is
I,
different.
I'm the same way. I balance between my theater to the mind maps, which is just a static image of the scene, and the
Hmm.
battle map. So if we're just going to have a discussion, I use the theater of the mind, but the battle maps are excellent for exploration or for setting the stage. Like if you're going to be
Hmm.
there, I'm going to put some other tokens in there. So it gives you kind of an idea of distance, what's going on in the different rooms, what you can visually see beyond that. So I definitely love your battle maps, and I know all the supporters, especially Legends of Barovia, are just go goo goo gaga over it. So I wanted to go through the I wanted to go through the process. So and I know we've discussed it. You start with the thought process in your head, and you draw it to paper. Is that correct?
Yeah. So my process. Well, I start with inspiration. That's my biggest thing. I get really I need to get into the headspace
Right.
of a map that I'm working on, even if it's just a forest map or if it's just an inn or a tavern. I'll pull up YouTube, I'll play some, tavern ambient music. I'll listen to the sounds of clinking glasses and murmuring adventures and maybe a couple tavern songs that might play. And it helps to transport my head there. Then what I'll do is I'll look at reference pictures. I just Google, fantasy tavern, or I use movies that I've seen or video games that I've played as points of references for nature scenes. I'm a big outdoors guy. I live in California, so I have access to some really great forests out here, as well as landscape, cityscapes and beaches. I'm fortunate to have a lot of different things. I love to take pictures. A lot of times I'll be walking with my wife and I'll see a beautifully architected building that was built in 1920, that has wonderful, stone masonry, carved bas reliefs going up the side and beautiful Corinthian columns, and those types of things inspire me. So I take pictures, even if it's just ground cover. If I see a part on the sidewalk that has a really cool looking moss kind of covering it, I'll
Right.
take a picture of that because I like to really make my scenes as realistic as I can get to them, given the tools that I have. So I start building a picture board or a folder I just call inspiration. I grab pictures and it could be from anything, stuff I find online, stuff I've taken myself. I get into the mood with music. So now I have the visuals. I have things that make me say, yes, this is what I want to capture. This is the mood that I'm looking for. Then what I'll do is I'll show you. I don't know if you could see it right here.
Yep.
Sorry for the light. But I
Yep.
am a terrible hand drawn artist. The irony. I'm
Oh,
actually a better
all right.
painter than I am a hand drawn illustrator. I actually for decades painted Warhammer miniatures for the longest time, armies of minis. Yeah,
I've painted a lot of minis
yeah.
myself.
Yeah, so I'm more of a my artistic skills are more painting and color theory than artistically drawn, but that's fine because I it's just a rough sketch.
Right.
I will try to sketch out where I want my elevation, where I want my buildings, how I want the flow of the map, where the roads go, where I want maybe a thicket. And it helps me visualize how that map is going to look.
Right. And
So
then you
that's
transfer that to online.
yeah. So then I kind of redo it online. So in Incarnate, I just hand draw. There's a tool called the pathing tool, which simply just lets me draw lines
I have that
freestyle.
up here on the screen right now. This is
Oh yeah.
the crypts. This is the last
Hmm.
floor that you've did for Ravenloft. So I have the hand drawing on there, and then you're filling
Yeah,
it in.
and that's right. And so what I'll do is it allows me to add a grid to the battle map. Now, this is where the logistics and planning of the map comes in. After I kind of get the artistic vision and know what I'm going to be building and what mood I'm trying to capture, then I'll focus on making sure that the map can translate to a VTT. It's very important that having playing in Roll20 myself, I'm very used to setting up dynamic lighting on maps. I actually enjoy it. It's therapeutic for me to just build dynamic lighting.
Right.
But I know that sometimes maps can be a little challenging because if those walls aren't right in the center or nearby that
Right.
line, it might be a little hard to draw dynamic lighting, and then you have fractions of squares that are visible to players, and it gets weird with token placement. So I try to think about the logistics of how I'm going to do that map and translate it to a VTT. So I hand draw those lines in Incarnate first
Are you
on the
hand?
grid.
Oh, okay. You're drawing those on the grid,
Yeah.
and those are
Yeah.
representing the white lines are representing the walls.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Rooms, walls, larger architectural pieces, maybe statues, benches, to anything that I want to add. It just gives me, or I might even just draw a rough circle and write the word trees. That just tells me, hey, this section is reserved for a forest grove. In Ravenloft, it was just a matter of outlining the rooms and the walls so I knew what went where.
What? How long does it take you to draw? For instance, the crypt that we're looking at now. How long did it take you to draw that before you started putting in the art?
I would say the beginning process of a map, the whole from everything I just outlined, from the whole ideation phase and collecting reference pictures to the whole, hand drawing of rough sketches versus creating I call it the blueprint
Right.
when I'm actually in Incarnate to creating the blueprint. That's about a day. For me, that's about maybe 6 hours ish worth of work. It really depends on the complexity of the map.
And then
But usually day one is just getting the logistics down.
you start filling it in with the artwork, and I'm looking right now at the half flooded dungeon cells in there where you've started to fill those in, and I mean just the level of detail. I mean, let me look at my glasses here. You have the bubbling, mucky looking water.
Yeah.
It's just you have shadows in there. One of the things I've noticed lately, what you've added to your maps, which I really like, is you have almost this kind of isometric feeling. It reminds me of that game Diablo or Fallout,
Hmm.
where it's got that kind of. It doesn't feel like it's totally top down. How do you get that perspective where you've got this kind of slight isometric?
Yeah.
How do you?
Both first of all, both great titles. Two of my favorite games. Very excited for Diablo 4 coming out soon, and I'm a huge Fallout nerd, so yeah, great titles. So with that, now that one's relatively new. I've always liked a bit of an angle, and it's funny because there's a middle ground that I try to find. If you go too angled out, what I've found is you lose a lot of map real estate. Um, what
Oh,
you gain is a much greater area to be able to really showcase walls. And if you do a traditional top-down map, it works great for things like dynamic lighting, but you lose a lot of real estate because you don't get to see. You might have a room description that says there's a huge mural that depicts a scene of warfare, and you're like, that's great, and it's really hard to show that on a top-down perspective.
right.
So what I've been trying to do, and I'm still continuing to master these techniques, is use the tools that I have to build a slight angle on the wall. Not much, just a slight angle. And what I do is I do that to show depth, to really get a sense of how big or deep that room might be. But it also allows me to add just a little bit of a flourish to the wall, whether it's a painting or a stone carved,
You,
bas relief or
you did that in the spires because you have the painting of Strahd
yeah,
in the spires. I remember
yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, in the spires, I also did that with the windows,
that's
in
right.
Escher
The
as
stained
well.
glass windows. Yeah,
Yeah, I wanted to really emphasize those windows. There's something so both romantic and gothic about
right.
these huge arched leaded windows with the wind blowing the silky red curtains in, and I can just see Escher lying on a bed with rose petals, lamenting the fact that Strahd is no longer interested in him, and I just love. See, I try to get into that scene and the feelings and the mood of that scene when I build those features.
I also noticed that you incorporate. I'm looking at the jail cells here, and so you've got or the prison cells. You've got the slight angle on the bars, and then you've got a shadow kind of cast in there, so it
Yeah.
gives you that kind of three-dimensional effect. If we go to the finished product here, which I have here, I mean the level of detail. I mean even in some of these crypts with the bodies in each of the crypts and your lighting, it's just. I mean you can just stare at this stuff for hours and just look at it. I don't know if I shared this with you. I played Ravenloft in '83 when it came out, and right after I played. By the way, my thief, I think he had 2 hit points if I can remember. He didn't make it. He didn't make it. I
Oh,
had to roll up a
rest
new
in peace.
roll up a new character. But
He's now part of the March of the Damned.
he's March of the Damned leaving that cemetery. But I rushed
Yep.
out afterwards after we played it, and I bought that module i6 Ravenloft because of that
Hmm.
giant isometric map. And they still
Hmm.
use that same map. And I just remember looking and staring at that map, just like, oh my gosh, this castle's so cool. I'm just imagining it. And now your gorgeous maps fill all of that stuff in. And it's just amazing. I just,
Well, I also
I
if
mean,
so,
look at
I kind
Strahd's
of do
crypt. This is
two.
just amazing. His crypt,
I do too. Oh yeah, well I wanted to tell a story with Strahd and Sergei's crypt on that one because the way I look at it is almost a classic good and evil. Sergei was the pure-hearted brother,
right?
the love-struck romantic, the good-looking one, and Strahd through
It's
years and
white and
decades of
marble, and
war. Yeah,
yeah, you get the
yeah.
angels and everything. And then you get down
So
to
so yeah, I
Dross's
tried to
ones.
make like a very dark red for Strahd and a very light, almost paladin feel for Sergei, and then the king and queen's crypt. I wanted to have more of an in between, more of a regal feel.
Right.
Um, but
It's amazing.
well, see, when I do recreations, because I kind of do half and half. I'll do maps of my own design, my own making. Sometimes I do maps for other content creators' adventures. Sometimes I recreate maps that are in the book, like I did for Curse of Strahd. And what I'll do as well as part of that creative process is I always make sure I read and reread the room description because I do want to try to capture everything that the box text describes as well, so that when a DM is reading that box text, it translates to the map as well.
Right. Now, I noticed that, by the way, and I'll be linking to your Patreon here, you make all of these maps, you have public versions of these maps, and then you make the 8K high resolution where you add some different effects, like you have nighttime, daytime, weather, some with spider webs and cobwebs. Um, I mean, you're not remaking the map every single time to do that, are you? I mean, what's that
No,
process where you're making 4 or 5 versions of the map?
yeah, that's a good question. I do include variants for all of my maps, and I've just recently I'm starting to hone my Photoshop skills. I'm still very much an amateur in the Photoshop space, but it's something I've introduced into my map making now as a standard. And in doing so, I've started to recolor my maps to create what I call different moods. So in addition to weather effects, night, day, and rain and different variants like that, I've also started to include mood variants with my releases, and it could be something like, maybe heightened the blues and the grays, tone down the color and create a
Right.
gloomy version, or maybe go the opposite and really dial up the color and create a more vibrant, brighter version, or a more amber, warm tone, right? And because mood's very important to me, so I
Right.
try to give options on moods. I also create a clean version. So to your point, when I create my clean versions, I try to remove any kind of effect that I think can be recreated using a VTT.
Okay.
So fog,
Right.
for instance, is a big one. Any kind of weather. I've even tried to remove lighting as well. I've gotten to the point where my more recent maps, I'll also strip out any lighting effects like flames, fire, torchlight, because I know that Foundry specifically you can add really cool effects. So I create clean versions where I strip all that out. Now in Incarnate, this kind of part of the logistics of thinking how you're going to build that map. Uh, what I'll do is for instance, all my fire, all my light will be grouped together in a single group asset on its own layer of the map
Oh,
program,
so it's a
so I
it's
can
a it's a
easily.
layering, right?
Yeah, it's all about layering. So I can easily go in there and say, okay, where's my light group? Make it 100% transparent. Now it's off the map. Then I re-download that file,
Wow.
and then there's your clean variant.
Wow. And the other question I had is, are you? I mean, you're using Photoshop for changing the atmosphere and
Mhm.
everything. Are you using Photoshop? I notice like when you have these cliffs, like I'm looking at the edge of the cliff and it just gets blurry all the way down, and it just
Mhm.
it shows depth. Are you doing that in Photoshop as well?
It's kind of a mix. I used to do it all in Photoshop, and Incarnate actually released it was a while back, I think a few months, maybe even a year at this point. They actually released a new feature that allows you to blur assets, which was a godsend for me because blur adds so much depth to a map, especially if you're trying to do a cliff scene.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, these cliffs are
so
amazing.
yeah, it's a mix. It's a mix of both. I'll blur in Incarnate. I also might add additional blurring effects in Photoshop to emphasize. I blur to emphasize depth. I also blur to emphasize underwater. So in the flooded
Right.
section of the prison, you'll notice the stairs that are submerged are slightly blurry as well to kind
Right.
of create that like underwater effect. So yeah, I do a lot. I've been doing more in Photoshop as well because it gives me greater range of how of tools. One thing specifically is rain and snow.
Right.
While Incarnate has some really great filters that allow me to just put rain on the map, what it doesn't allow me to do is uh, create rain on a map, but not in the interior. So if I do an in that has a bit of outside, a bit of inside, it doesn't allow me to create rain just on the outside. So I'd be doing those types of effects in Photoshop. It allows me I can cut out the interior so it's not raining on the interior of the inn, for instance.
Oh,
So
that's awesome.
that's what Photoshop allows me to do,
Now,
flexibility wise.
I know in Foundry, for instance, I don't do this, but Bailey Wiki has the different floors. He's using the floor mechanic. Are you making separate floors now? Have you thought about doing that where they can layer on top of each other within Foundry?
Yeah, it's something that I 100% want to do. And if anyone from the Incarnate team is watching, I implore you. One of the things I'm beholden to when I use any
Excuse
other
me.
person's map software are their terms and conditions. And unfortunately, right now for Incarnate, I'm not actually able to provide PNG files for roofs or different levels. However, it's something that I 100% will advocate for. And I get the reasoning behind it. They want to make sure I'm not just cutting out their art assets and redistributing them as my own, which is obviously a terrible thing to do.
Right.
But I think that given an entire floor of a map that I made, I hope that maybe at some point in the future they'll allow artists like myself to be able to provide PNG files for roofs for different floors or different layers on a map, so you can make use of really cool modules in Foundry that support that.
The big competitor to Encarta would be Dungeon Draft. What would
Mhm.
you say is the difference between the two softwares for somebody interested
Yeah,
in getting into it?
it's funny, and I'm not super. I obviously don't use Dungeon Draft every day like I do Incarnate. I'm more of the expert on the Incarnate space. But in the beginning, I did explore other map tools. I like Dungeon Draft a lot. I think one of the the key features Dungeon Draft has its ability to be able to draw walls. That one's huge because in Incarnate, walls are individual assets. Oftentimes, I build wall groups. So a section of wall, which might be 2 squares on a battle map, might consist of a dozen different assets that I've built in order to create just that section that I'll then replicate to draw the walls. So even walling a map can take me an entire night of work
Wow.
to do.
Wow.
Whereas Dungeon Draft, you can just draw a line on the map and it will automatically fill in the wall. Really great for curved sections, which can sometimes prove challenging in Incarnate. So that's a huge bonus, I would say, for the Dungeon Draft crew. In addition to the ability to be able to export, I believe they're called UVTT files, or files that specifically allow you to bake in dynamic lighting into your map, export it, and
Right.
then allow others to import that into their VTTs. Incarnate does not have that. It's just a straight JPEG export.
Can you mix and match Encarta and Dungeon Draft? Do they mix together? Can you use
You know,
one
I
and import it
I
into the other?
haven't I haven't tried that. But what I do know is Incarnate does allow you to import custom assets and custom textures as well. So I can't imagine I wouldn't be able to say build a segment in Dungeon Draft and import it into Incarnate and kind of use that, or vice versa,
Right.
as long as you're checking to make sure that you're compliant with various artist terms and conditions. I know with Dungeon Draft specifically, it has a great marketplace that allows you to buy or purchase assets created by other artists outside of their base library, which is great. But if you're planning on getting into map making, especially commercially, you always got to make sure you're checking, your terms and conditions, your extended licenses. Check with each artist you're working with. Make sure that they understand you're using their stuff for commercial credit when necessary. Just
Right.
just be a good ally to artists because they work hard and they deserve the respect of a credit. So
If there's brand new, I'm brand new making a map. What would be the couple basic tips that you would give any starting map maker like myself? I'm going to draw a map for the first time. What's some tips that you would give me?
um I would say brand new. You're just the first time.
Don't know what
This
I'm
one's
doing.
challenging because
Yeah.
yeah, I'm trying not to get too in depth with a new person. I would say this. Variation is key. That's probably the one thing you can do out of the gate that will make your map look a little bit more lived in. And when I say variation, what I see a lot of first time map makers do, and I did this myself,
Right.
is you get a tree asset, for instance, and you place the same tree asset all over the page because you just get it, you just start clicking all over the page, and now you got a bunch of trees, and there's your forest. But what ends up happening is all your trees look the same because they're the same color, they're the same size. Um,
Just
even
stamped them.
even a slight, yeah, just stamp, and it looks very well, it looks very fake, right?
Right.
And you're looking at it like going, well, why doesn't my map look like this guy's map over here? You know, um, Even something as simple as taking each asset and slightly rotating them, changing the size, it's a little bit more tedious.
Right.
But even something like changing the sizes of your trees, if you're able to, in Incarnate, you can alter the hue and color, you can desaturate, you can increase your saturation,
So
making little
variation.
tiny edits. Yeah, making small edits, even if you're using the same stamp, can add to the variety of that piece and make it just feel a little bit more like a forest or like an inn. If you're using the same bed, maybe try to use another asset to have some messy sheets, or try changing the color of one bed versus the other one to make them look a little different from one another.
One of the things that I really like about your maps a lot compared to a lot of other map makers out there is I noticed that there's this same throughout the entire map and the maps that you're putting together. For instance, Curse of Strahd. There's the same, I don't know, palette. I don't even know if I want to say palette. A same art style. There's a consistency in the tone, not just the quality, but the tone, kind of the
Mhm.
color to that. Can you speak to that a little bit?
And in fact, if you don't mind rolling back to that last question, I have one more nugget of
Okay,
advice to new map
sure.
makers, and then I'll answer your next one. Sorry to jump around, but one thing that I think is very important outside of just building your map is whatever you do, if you're brand new to map making, um, use inspiration from other map makers. Go on to Reddit subs and look at maps that are being made. But whatever you do, don't get discouraged and don't compare, because that can be a very dangerous trap to fall into when you build your first map and you look at someone. If let's say you look at one of my maps, and I've been doing it for 4 years now in Incarnate, or 3, 4 years. Obviously I do this every day for 8+ hours a day, almost every single day of my life, right? Don't compare yourself or don't beat yourself up if your map doesn't quite look like what you're seeing online.
Right.
Very important. Don't get discouraged. Keep on going. Use those maps as inspiration, as a North Star, but just don't beat yourself up if your map isn't coming out as like perfect as you hope or want. Just keep practicing. So sorry, that's very
No, no,
important to me, and I
that's
wanted to focus on that. Regarding your other question of the tonality or the mood of the different maps that I do, I do try to keep a consistent mood. Obviously, if you look at my earliest work, I think one of the first maps I built for Borovia, I'm trying to
the
remember.
gates of Barovia.
I think it was the gates. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was either that or
a
the
misty
village of
road.
Borovia, but it might be the gates. That I built, it looks a little brighter than you'll
Right.
see like my more recent maps. But I try to create a gloomy atmosphere without it being too dark, and that's very challenging because Barovia is a dark place. There's no natural sunlight coming through, and it's a dark place. But sometimes that doesn't translate well to a battle map if your battle map is too dark and no one can actually see it. So the trick is to adjust the tones of the map in a way that you can still see it clearly. It's bright enough without looking happy or cheery, because Barovia is far from a happy, cheery place.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. They just look. There's this tonality to them that I really like uh, a lot.
I
Next,
uh, I uh, I desaturate a lot of color when I place assets. I
right?
do have kind of a saturation level that I feel is fitting for Barovia. So you typically won't find a lot of bright, vibrant colors. When I place something that might be a red, I'll desaturate that by 40 to 60% because I try to bring the colors down to almost a muted tone. Almost like, I love a lot of old horror movies.
Right.
Fan of Bela Lugosi's, Boris Karloff, right? I love the
Nice.
old horror movies, and I've even been tempted to create a variant of Castle Ravenloft that's just black and white.
Oh, that
The
would be
like the old
really.
Dracula film. Yeah, I
Oh, that
just
would be
something
really
fun.
good. And my video,
But
my videos that are in black and white would go with that.
yeah,
for
exactly.
for sure. Now, I've
Yeah.
I've seen recently there's a kind of a new wave of these kind of plug and play 3D map software like uh, Dungeon Alchemist.
Dungeon Alchemy. Yeah. Mhm.
What are those, and how do those compare to what you're doing?
Yeah, I know that there's a couple of them out there. I have Dungeon Alchemist and I've used it personally, so I can really only speak to excuse me, to that platform. Dungeon Alchemist is what I would say is it's awesome for being able to create a super quick map in minutes that looks really good. And I mean that in minutes. I
Wow.
ran we were doing a one shot with my friends and I ran one of the adventures from the Radiant Citadel
Oh,
Wizards of
right.
the Coast book.
Right.
And it was the one that was, loosely based on Dia de los Muertos, which
Yeah.
is
Day of the
is
Dead.
huge in my household. Yeah, it's huge in my
By the
household.
way,
Um,
that's my birthday.
oh, is it? Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
I've been to
Uh,
Oaxaca a few times in Mexico for Dia de los Muertos. So
I actually wanted to do a map inspired by that location because
oh, yeah,
it is so vibrant and beautiful. My
yeah,
my wife is of Mexican heritage as well, and she's kind of introduced the customs into our household.
Oh yeah,
You
it's
know,
a
so
great
it
holiday,
yeah.
great special day.
So that's why that adventure really stood out to me. Problem is, I don't have any maps that represent a desert
Right.
like village that has kind of the Adobe style buildings. I don't have any maps. So I whipped up Dungeon Alchemist. I needed a map for a session of the intro town. I think within maybe 10 minutes, I had the whole town flushed out with multiple buildings, interiors. I had the gates. I mean, I had everything. It really is just like using 3D assets, much like building a video game. And it gives you these 3D static assets that you're able to even animate. You can have swaying trees and fire that's actually crackling, or just export a static version. It allows you to play with the terrain, create height. It is a really wonderful tool if you don't have a lot of time to build maps. Um, and you just want to create a map in minutes. You can create a forest map in probably under 5 minutes. It's great for that. For me, and this isn't a dig on the platform at all. I recommend it for many DMs.
Right.
For me as a map maker, it's obviously limiting in that I can't do 100% what I would do to that scene. We talk about mood,
Right.
color theory. What I could do is probably export a copy of that and then do my thing in Photoshop. But when it comes to building, sometimes I have very specific a specific design that I'm looking for, and it can be a little limiting in that. Hey, here's your one asset that you have, and combining assets can be tricky if not at all in that platform. So a lot of times when I create a group in Incarnate, a shelf, for instance, a
Right.
basic three-tiered shelf, for me is a group of maybe 12 to 16 different assets that I've built, grouped together, and used that for the map. Whereas you can't
Right.
really get that detailed,
Right. So
but but that
you're
doesn't
limited
apply
to
to
their
most people.
library of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
So the look and
right.
feel is going to have the same type of look and feel, limited to the assets in their library, is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Versus,
But yeah, but I've also seen some really amazing cartographers create some absolutely gorgeous maps using Dungeon Alchemist. Some of the stuff that I've been blown away with. So it's a great tool. I mean, I like I said, I recommend it, especially for the DM who just needs a map in 5 minutes. I think that you can use that to churn out some really cool looking stuff.
now I know we're working together. We're wrapping up of Curse of Strahd, Legends of Barovia, almost a 2 year project on there.
Hmm.
But you're also doing commission work for others, most recently Lunch Break Heroes. And I know Lunch Break Heroes just launched its Kickstarter. Can you talk a little bit about the process as a commission artist, and any tips that you could recommend to people that are interested in maybe making maps on commission? How do you work with somebody like Lunch Break Heroes? How do you set that up? What kind of free reign do you have, or any
Yeah.
recommendations you could share about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't take a huge amount of commissions only because I am so busy with my own Patreon schedule. I do maps 4 times monthly on my Patreon release, and I really want to focus on the community that has supported me. That's always been my primary goal, and the community of D&D at large, or TTRPGs in general. Because it's not like my maps are
Right.
specific for D&D. Even though I recreate some module maps, I have plenty of maps that can be used for Pathfinder or a lot of the other RPG games out there. But when it comes to commissions, specifically, I'm very lucky in that I have a great relationship with Lunch Break Heroes. They featured my maps in their newest Kickstarter that just launched yesterday, Libris Nocturnum. It is a book of, I can't remember specifically how many, but it's an anthology. I want to
12.
say 12,
Yeah.
12 or 13. Yeah, I think it's 12 adventures that take you from level 0. And there's actually rules about a level 0 game for maps that I created called Zombie Attack, which is really fun, all the way up to level 12. So when it comes with working with them specifically, I'm very lucky in that they've given me a lot of creative license. Um, I will get a draft copy of the adventure, and the first thing I do is I read it through, and I just kind of I make bullet points, things that stand out. The inn that I'm working on, it says that it used to be a great inn back in the heyday. but they rebuilt one of the major trade routes and it kind of directed traffic away from that inn. So now it's a bit off the beaten path.
A little
So
dilapidated.
yeah, so I make that. I put that as a bullet point. Like, okay, the inn needs to look like at one point it was big and, grandiose, but now is looking a little rundown. So I have to be able to show both and tell that story in the visuals. So I'll go through the document, the draft. I make my notes. But what I appreciate about Lunch Break Heroes is that they give me a lot of creative freedom. Um, as long as it fits the adventure. Then I always show my work to them as I give them progress shots to get updates. I'm very communicative with how it's coming along, how I plan on approaching things. But at the end of the day, when it comes to taking those commissions, for me, I think each artist is different. It's important to maintain that creative flexibility. Sometimes, if a project is a little too rigid, in that there's a certain vision that a client might want, and if you're not excited about the project, it's always my recommendation to maybe not accept that project, because your
Yeah.
passion needs to show into the work. And if you hate what you're doing for that commission, it's just going to be a miserable experience. You don't want to spend 60 hours on a map and just have 60 grueling hours where it feels like work. You want it to be fun and inspirational.
Well, I've been of my supporters. One of the questions we're wrapping up, obviously, Ravenloft here. You finished the crypt maps, which we're looking at now. I just got done walling that, and I'm filling in the content, writing the guides for that. But they've been asking, is there anything else for Legends of Barovia in the expanded campaign?
Mhm.
And I know I just wanted to share with everybody. We've already talked about the Mad Mage already for that, and then we have coming out because both of our schedules are busy. I would say the future Ravenloft content will be released periodically, so you would have to stay tuned for updates. But Mad Mage is on our schedule for sure, and we have a special thing that's happening inside the pillar, the actual rock face, a dungeon crawl in there, which is something we'll be working on. Don't know the release date of that because we have something else, something really big, right? Really big coming
That's
out.
right.
Super big. So as we wrapping up Curse of Strahd and Legends of Barovia, we are shifting our attention. Drum roll. Do you know what that is? You want to tell everybody?
Oh, I mean, I think you should do the honors, Pyro.
Well, Diamandi's already released Salt Marsh. Here's the image of the map, the parchment map. And so we are tackling Salt Marsh together. And this is just amazing. He's already got the parchment map. It's released on his Patreon page. And our
And
approach
it's public as well.
is public.
Anyone can access it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
public. There's a free version on there. I'll give you a link to that on there, and we're going to obviously tackle it like we did Curse of Strahd and the Legends of Barovia project, but we're already going to be adding some additional new locations, some additional side quest lines. So expect that coming out here. I'm going to be finishing up the first guide next month, the campaign guide, the introduction, and we're going to be seeing stuff from DM Andy and Salt Marsh. So I'm really excited about this. It's going to be a little different. I'm going to take a multi-prong approach. So I'm working on writing the campaign. So if you want to play just a one shot, you can. Or I'm also writing a plot line like I did with the Fey quest to tie all of them together to tighten it up that story because it's not really a campaign. And last but not least, I'm putting it together to make Salt Marsh if you want to play a West March system, using this as a hub town so you can go off and do some quests in it. So I'm tackling all three of those. It's pretty ambitious. I'm really excited about it. Of course, really excited to be working with DM Andy and all the great inspiration. You want to talk a little bit about your Salt March parchment map, which is completely different on how you tackle your battle maps. We have that up
Yeah,
here.
that is a nod back to my absolute love for parchment maps. I have maps. I know you can't really see them. You can kind of see one over here. my whole wall in my office space is just covered in maps that I've procured. I got my parchment map of Skyrim back here, and I have the Tal'Dorei maps that were in the books. I love parchment maps. I love working on them. I love cartography in general. I did one for I've done three three. I've done three now. I did one for Borovia. I have a
Right.
Barovian parchment map. Again, all these are public, because it's IP restricted. So I always release that stuff for public consumption for free. So I have Borovia. I also, for the Grim Hollow, if you're familiar with the Ghostfire Gaming
Right.
universe of Grim Hollow, their continent of Etheris, I have a parchment map of Etheris. That's a campaign or a campaign setting I personally love. I'm planning on running that after Curse of Strahd. So I have that. I also have now the Salt Marsh parchment map, and I did that first because it was one of the things when I did Curse of Strahd. I just kind of jumped in. I didn't really have any direction. I didn't know what I was doing. I just jumped in. Right, I just started making maps, and when I found that the community really received those maps quite well, then I started to think, okay, well, this is becoming a lot bigger, and I'd love to map everything. So I'll just start at the beginning. Let's go to the gates, and I'll map that, and let's go to Death House, and let's go to the village of Borovia, and so on and so forth. And I kind of started at the beginning of the module and started working my way down. Even though Curse of Strahd isn't that linear, but I just took it one section at a time. With Saltmarsh, it gave me, with the experience in the last 2 years of map making, a chance to actually start planning the releases and how I was going to approach the maps. And I figured, well, what better place than to start with Saltmarsh, and
Right.
what better place than to start with a parchment map?
Right.
Um,
It's
that you can even,
gorgeous.
if you wanted to, hand your players. You could even print it out and hand them a physical parchment map. I even created one without any text on it. So if you wanted to hand them just a blank map of Saltmarsh with the buildings where they go, "Hey, what is there?" You're like, "I don't know. You're gonna have to
It's a
go
good-
check it out yourself."
So, did you? It looks like you folded this map up a few times here to get these creases in here. How did you put those beautiful creases in your map?
It's a combination of being really creative with some of the assets that were available, and blending them and creating a really a dark and light contrast color. In fact, I got the idea because directly behind me on my wall, I have a parchment map of Skyrim that I got. I can't remember. I think it was in the limited edition box when the game first came out too long ago. We need a new Elder Scrolls, Bethesda. Anyway, and it's folded, and it's in my frame, but it still has the fold lines on it. And when I was doing Barovia, I was thinking, like, how can I make this map? In my head, I thought, well, how can I distribute this map to my players? They might find that on a dead body of a cartographer
That's
who
right.
maybe tried to
Pull out of
map
the
a little bit
pocket.
too far into the fog. Yeah. And or maybe, he got into a tussle with the Witch of the Wild or the Swamp Witch, and didn't make it out of Perez, and they find his body with a map kind of tucked into his pocket. So I like to think, like, if the adventurers unfolded that map, it would have crease lines on it.
Right. I
So I
mean,
started adding crease lines.
it's
Yeah.
just another example of your attention to detail to really create that level of immersion. It's not just static and generic. It's got this feel to it that I just draws me to this. I'm thinking this already. I've already started outlining stuff for this. I'm just so excited to jump in on this project here as we wrap up Legends of
I
Barovia,
I
jumping
kind
into
of
Legends of Salt Marsh.
I kind of hope to be able to create parchment maps as well in that same style. Not just world maps, but also for cities,
All right.
especially in Borovia, like Kresk and the village of Borovia, Valaki. There are some new assets and some new features coming out at Incarnate that I've been given the honor to help kind of test. So I'm kind of hoping to use their classic battle map style that hopefully should be coming out soon to try to emulate some parchment maps of more regional locations, as opposed to a much more wider scale. I don't know how it's going to come out yet. It's going to take some playing around, but
I look
that's
forward
my
to it.
goal.
I look forward to it.
Yeah. And
Wow.
with Saltmarsh, I figured I'd start with the parchment map because beyond that, I plan on creating maps for all 30 salt marsh locations that are in the book, plus anything new that Pyram comes up with as well.
Well,
So, you know,
there's another location for and I've seen some drawings of it. I don't know if it's in the book. I think I have it right.
I don't have the book right next to me,
Oh
but
no, I've got the Curse of
I know there's another larger area map as well. If that's the one you're
um,
referring to.
no, there's another village. It's the one out in the ocean. It's kind of like deserted.
Hmm.
Uh, oh, is it the Styles?
What I can say is, like I did for Curse of Strahd, if it's in there, I'm gonna have a map for it. So my obviously my plan is, if it's a location in the book, you'll have a map for it eventually. Can't promise when, but
Oh yeah,
it'll be mapped. Yeah.
yeah. That's I think it's called the Styles there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that'd be
Yeah.
a nice parchment map too, huh?
That one will be a good one, and I'll even take that. I might even section that out into quadrants and build multiple battle maps.
Yeah,
Be able to kind
I've
of,
been really excited going through this, so can't wait for that.
yeah. Oh, it's gonna be a fun change of pace. And one of the things that I wanted to do as well when I create these maps, because I love dark fantasy. That's my shtick.
Oh, I do
I'm a
too.
big dark fantasy guy.
Gothic horror.
Having yeah, gothic horror. I love it. That's why I'm going from one dark fantasy campaign, moving into Grim Hollow, which is another dark fantasy. That's just my thing. So realizing that the mood, we talk about mood and tone, Ghost of Saltmarsh is going to be bright. It's going to be sun swept, almost sun bleached. You know, that
Nautical.
constant coastal sun. Yeah, very nautical. So the maps are going to be a different tone. But I do still plan on creating dark fantasy versions of those same maps. So, for instance, the first location are the gates, the main gate.
Right.
That's location one in the book. That's going to be the first map I'm going to do. I'll have a nice, bright, sunny, cheery, maybe with some warm sun rays coming down. But I'm also going to create a version with heavy fog that has a more grim, dark tone to it, which can then be used into dark fantasy campaigns. A map like that can easily be used for Barovia as much as it can for Saltmarsh.
I forgot to ask you. I'm really excited. I haven't asked you yet, so I'm going to ask you now. Shark Fin Bridge. I can imagine. Yeah, with all the little shops and the little stuff going on
I
there.
I am super. I've actually already started creating my ideation board for Shark Fin Bridge.
That's going to be
There's a
so
couple
cool.
real world. In fact, I found some images of I believe, and I am not a historian, so any historians watching, don't judge me too harshly, but I believe at one point the London Bridge had buildings and houses and shops along the side of it. I might be thinking of a different bridge in London. So, like I said, forgive
I
me if
would.
I'm wrong, but I know historically there were real world bridges that actually had houses and shops built into the bridge itself, and I'm super excited to build that one.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be really fun. I'm really really excited about it. Well, DM Andy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, sharing your ideas, sharing your wisdom, some tips, some background on what's going on. Any last minute words of wisdoms you want to leave us with?
Oh, I mean, first of all, thank you for having me. It's always
Of
such an
course.
honor to be invited. I'm just a humble map maker, and so I appreciate,
I wouldn't be here
the
without you,
spotlight.
so
I'm
this is a
trying to get,
punch.
I'm trying to not shy away from the spotlight. Be like, no, other people might want to hear
Yeah.
me nerd out about maps. No, really, just I all I want to really say is I just want to thank the community at large. I know that we had a rocky start in January, but damn, did this community come together, and that's one of the best things. I've seen the healthiest, the most welcoming, the kindest community in the RPG space. Everybody on Reddit has been amazingly kind to my work. As an artist, you're always a little hesitant to share your work publicly because criticism can be harsh sometimes.
Right.
And I've received, I mean, it's just such an amazing experience. So really, from the bottom of my heart, I just want to thank everyone who has supported my work, who has supported Pyrom, and every other D&D or RPG creator out there. as a creator myself, it really humbles us when you upvote our posts or when you comment or even an engagement or a share or a like on a video. It can be huge for us. And we just want to thank everyone who takes the time out to support our passions and our creations. And in exchange, we hope that we can also help the DMs and players out there just have a better experience.
Well, yes, thank you too. One of my favorite things, by the way, I put it on my Discord channel, is to read your campaign stories. So I love, being able to share this content with DM Andy. But the biggest treat you can do for me is it
Mhm.
just doesn't have to be that much, but just leave some story that happened in your campaign. I just love reading those because some of those things are
Yeah.
just crazy ideas, and the players getting all kind of crazy antics, and I mean, just goes off into some fun direction. I really, really enjoy. That's one of my favorite things to do. Is when I'm working, I need to take a mental break. I just read some of those great campaign stories. So if you have any fun campaign stories, just go ahead and jump on our Discord channel. Leave it in our campaign story section. Love reading those. DM Andy's on our
Yeah.
Discord too.
Yeah. Tag me in those stories too, so I can
Yeah,
read them.
yeah. He's in on our Discord channel. You can go ahead. And people ask him questions all the time, so make sure you say hi. I have DM Andy's Patreon page up here. I just want to show you. He has a map hub, and I don't know how many maps that you've made for the public for free, which is
Um,
incredible. I mean, I've got the
yeah,
Curse of
there's a
Strahd
lot.
up here. It's got to be what, 40 maps, 50 maps.
I think there's more than that. I have over 175 maps. I think I'm closer to 180 now in total on my page. But
Wow.
anything that's a recreation from a published book is going to be available for free. And then I also have a lot of non-recreation maps that I've created that are also free too, that I just kind of throw out there.
Well, go check them
Because
out. It's and by the way, if you want those 8K high resolution, really gorgeous maps, please become a Patreon supporter of DM Andy's so that he can continue to make these gorgeous maps for us.
and anything helps. Even I don't want that to be a barrier. Like I said, I
Yeah.
have a lot of free maps that are out there, and even if it's just upvoting a comment on Reddit, that's great support. So thank you.
Hey, thank you so much. And until next time, this is Parm King. May all your rolls be critically successful.